Good morning. This is Max Sagan reporting on my class ESL 605. This is my final project called the Scaffolded Content Unit, reported in December 2020. To begin, the content area that I planned my 5-lesson plan sequence on was mathematics. The big question was, how does understanding proportions, expressions, and equations influence how we live? The enduring understanding is students should understand how proportions, expressions, and equations influence how they live, and the grade level is 7th grade. The EL student profile. So the types of EL students in my class out of the different types that we've learned in class are primarily long-term English learners, and each of the reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills were based on the fact that the majority are long-term English learners and is focused on that type of EL student. In my lesson plan number 1, the content objectives are: students will be able to identify a situation in which 100% can be applied. Students will be able to understand that in percentage math problems, they can express the change in a quantity as percentage of the starting point. Students will be able to reason about percentages as rates per 100 to solve percent increase and decrease problems. And students will understand percent increase of decrease using 100% as a starting and ending point. The language objectives that we focused on are: students will be able to listen to teacher demonstrate from the math textbook about how to calculate a percentage increase or decrease. Students will explain what percentage increase and decrease is and listen to a peer. Students will share in Zoom formative exit slip what they observed when they worked with a partner to calculate a percent increase or decrease. Students will be able to record their own ideas in math workbooks. Using the sentence stem, percent is an increase, percent increase is blank, percent decrease is blank. And finally, students will summarize with a partner what percentage is using a number line. The learning strategies used in our lesson 1, titled 100%, were teacher talk, notice and wonder, whole group instruction, use of sentence starters, use of sentence frames, vocabulary word bank, increased wait time, and use of multiple modalities. The materials and technology used were the Open Up Math Book resources, pages 99 through 107. These are the textbooks that we use in our math curriculum. Students' Chromebooks, the Zoom platform, the Google Classroom, and the formative assessment Google form. The suggested differentiation for English levels 1 through 4 are found here. So the example context for language use is: students will be able to identify a situation in which 100% can be applied to express the change in a quantity as a percent of the starting amount. Next, students will discuss and determine similarities of practice example number 1 in the number line using the vocabulary words percentage, starting amount, number line, and original amount. When thinking of the different levels, we started at level 1, where students were verbally identifying that the math problem needs to be solved by calculating a percentage, and slowly and scaffold their way up to level 5, where students will verbally identify that in math percentage problems, they can express the change in a quantity as the percentage of the starting amount using the vocabulary terms percentage, starting amount, number line, and original amount. Moving on to lesson 2 is titled More and Less Than 1%. The content objectives are: students will be able to learn what a percentage less than 0 looks like. Students will be able to understand that similar percentages can be determined by moving the decimal left or right. Students will be able to conduct an investigation on what happens when multiples and small percentages such as 0.5 are multiplied by 100 and 1000. Language objectives. Students will be able to listen to the teacher demonstrate from the math textbook about how percentages less than 0 can be changed into a larger percentage. Students will be able to explain how to complete the skill independently into applying it into a small group. Students will be able to share with the instructor how to convert percentages less than 1. Students will be able to share their own ideas with the whole group and listen to their classmates' ideas on how to convert percentages using the sentence stem. To convert a percentage less than 1 to a number larger than 1, I have to blank. And finally, students will demonstrate with a formative practice problem how to convert numbers less than 1 to numbers greater than 1. Students will do this using the following learning strategies: concept mapping, interactive technology, relation to cultural background, use of visual representations, explicit modeling, peer collaboration, summarizing, graphic organizers, whole group instruction, use of sentence starters, use of sentence frames, vocabulary word bank, increased wait time, and use of multiple modalities. Materials and technology for lesson 2 are the Open Up Math Book resources, pages 120 to 131, students' Chromebooks, the Zoom platform, and the Google Classroom. The suggested differentiation for English levels 1 through 4 is found here. On the wider rubric, we start at level 1 entering, where students are expected to will be evaluated by listening and identifying that a mathematical problem needs to be solved by calculating the percentage, and slowly working our way up to level 5, where students will listen and identify that a mathematical word problem includes a number less than 0 and that the decimal point needs to move right or left by multiplying by 100. Lesson 3 is called Percentage Contexts. The content objectives of Lesson 3 are: students will be able to learn what a percentage means. Students will be able to learn to understand that percentage can be determined by an increase or decrease. Students will be able to conduct an investigation on what happens when one calculates a percentage of a given number. And finally, students will identify the percentage increase and decrease of a mathematical scenario. Language objectives for lesson number 3, percentage contexts, are: students will be able to listen to the teacher demonstrate from the math book about how percentage is calculated. Students will be able to explain what percentage is and listen to their partner. Students will share in Zoom breakout rooms what they observed when they conducted an investigation on what happens when they calculated a percentage of a given number. Students will be able to share their own ideas with the whole group and listen to their classmates' ideas on what percentage is using the sentence stem: I think that percentage is blank. And finally, students will summarize with a partner what percentage is using a graphic organizer and sentence stem: percentage is blank. Students will be using the following learning strategies in lesson number 3, percentage context: graphic organizers for writing, interactive technology, use of visual representations, explicit modeling, peer collaboration, summarizing, whole group instruction, use of sentence starters, use of sentence frames, increased wait time, and use of multiple modalities. The materials and technologies used in lesson 3 are the Open Up Math Book resources, pages 164 to 175, graphic organizer, Chromebooks, Zoom platform, and Google Classroom. The suggested differentiation for English levels 1 through 4 is found here. This particular assignment is evaluating on written expression. Level 1, the students, I have to identify that a mathematical problem needs to be solved by calculating the percentage. And slowly we work our way up to level 5 and scaffold our way up to level 5. Students will have to explain how to calculate percentage step by step and why this is important to be able to apply this in real world applications. Moving on to lesson 4, titled Percentage Error. This was the one lesson that I used the CALA lesson template, whereas the other ones we used the other method. Content objective: students will be able to calculate percentage error of given mathematical scenario. The language objective is students will be able to evaluate and solve percent error of a given mathematical scenario using vocabulary words such as measurement, amount, greater than, less than, and actual. The lesson 4, percentage error continued. The learning strategies used would be a variety of different learning strategies, starting with the cognitive strategy, where students will use a student document sheet to record their percent error totals. The vocabulary learning, students will practice using the correct vocabulary by speaking. Social and effective strategy, students will collaborate with a partner and compare each other's percentage calculations. Metacognitive strategy, students will plan and organize how to calculate percent error for each problem. and then a task-based strategy where students will use their background knowledge and collaborate with a partner to complete the lesson activity. The lesson activity is a gallery walk where students are going to be required to go to different galleries where they're going to be a different percent error problem displayed, and they're going to be working with a partner to solve this percent error problem. Typically, we'd be able to do this in person in the classroom, but due to us working from home, we adapted the gallery walk strategy to an online format. Materials and technology used in lesson 4% error are the Open Up Math book resources, graphic organizer called Student Document for Gallery Walk, Chromebooks, Zoom breakout rooms, Google Classroom, and then a FIST to 5 assessment at the end to assess how the student, it's a self-assessment to see how they are feeling about the information they just learned. The suggested differentiation for English levels 1 through 4 is found on this page. This is evaluating the domain of speaking. So in level 1, students will have to point to and be able to identify that the math problem in front of them is a percent error math problem. Working their way up through the levels 2, 3, and 4, the final level 5, would be students can differentiate and explain the difference between a percent error math problem and a typical math problem using academic vocabulary. Finally, lesson 5, titled Relationships Between Quantities. The content objectives are students will be able to learn how the percentages are used in real-world newspaper clippings. Students will be able to understand that percentage can be determined by a percent increase or decrease. Students will be able to conduct an investigation on what happens to prices using percentages while using newspaper clippings. And finally, students will identify the percentage increase and decrease of a mathematical newspaper clipping. Now, what that means is they will be evaluating advertisements with percentages on them. The language objectives are students will be able to listen to the teacher demonstrate from the math textbook about how percentages are used in real-world situations. Students will be able to explain how to determine whether a scenario is displaying a percent increase or percent decrease. Students will use key vocabulary to share in Zoom breakout rooms what they observed and how they determined which pile the clipping should be sorted into. Students will be able to share their own ideas with the whole group and listen to their classmates' ideas on what percentage is using the sentence stem. I think that this newspaper clipping should be sorted into the blank pile because blank. And finally, the last language objective is students will be able to summarize with a partner how percentage is used in the news. Lesson number 5, relationships between quantities learning strategies are text to graphics, graphic organizers for writing, use of visual representations, explicit modeling, peer collaboration, summarizing, whole group instruction, use of sentence starters, use of sentence frames, increased wait time, and use of multiple modalities. Materials and technology are the Open Up Math book resources, page 208 to 212, newspaper clippings with percentage advertisements, graphic organizer worksheet with percentage advertisements, Chromebooks, Zoom platform, Google Classroom, and finally, the suggested differentiation for English levels 1 through 4 is found on this page. This domain is evaluating reading, and in level 1, students will be required to read and identify that mathematical problems needs to be solved by considering the percentage, scaffolding our way up to level 5, where students will read and correctly identify mathematical problem needs to be solved by placing it in the correct pile, percent increase or percent decrease, and explain why. End of unit assessment. I will know that students have mastered the content at each language level by using formal and informal assessments. For informal assessments, starting with lesson 1. So in lesson 1, students will demonstrate their understanding of how to express the change in a quantity as percentage of a starting number on a number line. An exit slip will be presented asking, what are the similarities and differences of number lines and percentages? Students will be given a vocabulary word to answer the question prompt. The informal assessment of lesson 2 is Students will demonstrate their understanding by being placed into individual breakout groups. Teachers will go from room to room and ask students, what is the solution of 0.25 multiplied by 100? Students will have the opportunity to use the practice problems we completed as an example, the problems they completed with a partner, as well as the resources uploaded to Google Classroom. Teachers will have the opportunity to clear up misconceptions with students and give them one-on-one assistance in their individual breakout rooms. The informal assessment of lesson 3 is students will demonstrate their understanding of how to find the percentage increase or decrease when they know the original amount and the new amount. The practice problem will be displayed on the Zoom screen as well as in the Google form. Students at a higher language proficiency will explain the step-by-step process how they calculated percentage. The informal assessment for lesson 4 is students will complete an exit ticket. The students will be given a percent error problem to solve. The students will have to read, analyze, and calculate the percent error of each mathematical problem. In order to have students involved in assessing their own knowledge of the context learning and language objectives, I will have them complete a self-assessment. I will use a fist to 5 self-assessment strategy to complete this. I will have each student rate their level of understanding for the different components of lessons, such as understanding using vocabulary, identifying percentage error problems, correctly calculating percent error, collaborating with a partner, and completing the student answered document. And finally, the formal assessment of lesson 5, students will demonstrate their understanding of this lesson by summarizing what they have learned using a graphic organizer with vocabulary word bank. Finally, the formal assessments. So on formal assessments, we can use creative assessment activities that capitalize on the student's strengths. A few examples, instead of just a normal multiple choice, is we can have students show their knowledge and show what they have learned in the activity by journaling, drawing, acting out, or perhaps a student-created question to assess their own peers. Here are my references for this assignment. Thank you very much for watching my presentation of our Week 8 final project, the Scaffolded Content Unit. Thank you for the opportunity to learn these different materials and methods throughout the semester, and I thank my classmates for having such wonderful discussion posts and such engaging discussion posts as well as their responses. Thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a nice holiday.